Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Hello. Good morning. How you going? Nice to see you all. Welcome. All right. Full house. Good. Good morning. My name is Cam, and I'm a researcher here at the Development Policy Centre at the Crawford School of Public Policy in the ANU's College of Asia and the Pacific. Before we begin today, on behalf of the ANU, I would like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and pay respect to their elders, past and present. I'd also like to thank Auntie Serena Williams for the very lovely welcome to country she delivered at last night's conference opening reception. Thank you, Serena. It's great to have you back. So welcome to the 9th Australasian AID and International Development Conference. I'd like to extend a special welcome to both the Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Fiji, the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad, and His Excellency Ajay Amrit, High Commissioner of the Republic of Fiji to Australia. Welcome. I'd also like to welcome other members of the diplomatic community and officials from the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And hello to those joining online. I think there's quite a few. A big hello to those who might be watching from COP28 in Dubai and are fighting to keep the 1.5 degree alive. Thank you. Since its inception in 2013, the aim of the AAC has been to bring together multidisciplinary researchers, policymakers and practitioners from across Australia, Asia, the Pacific and beyond to share insights, promote collaboration, develop the research community and inform public policy and debate around international development. Aid policy, aid effectiveness and development finance are some of our key areas of focus. Aid and climate change, gender equality and social inclusion and locally led development have also become important areas of focus in recent years. This is DevPolicy's third and final annual conference for 2023 and follows on from our very successful Pacific and PNG updates, delivered in collaboration with the University of the South Pacific and the University of PNG, the Asia Foundation and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Before we begin, just quickly, I'm sure you know that DevPolicy likes to run the numbers. Don't worry, I haven't got any charts. We have almost 600 delegates at this year's conference, I think actually perhaps just over as of this morning. We have 35 parallel panel sessions, 3 keynote speakers, 2 keynote panels, and 3 launch events across the 2.5 days. Demand to present at AAC remains very high. We were only able to accommodate about 40% of the proposals we received this year. But thank you to all of those who provided proposals. As well as Australia and New Zealand, we have speakers and presenters from over a dozen countries across the region, including PNG, Fiji, Vanuatu, Kiribati, Timor-Leste, Indonesia, the Philippines, Cambodia, Vietnam, Singapore, Taiwan, Nepal and India, plus international speakers from the US, the UK and Canada. So thank you to those who've travelled and thank you to those who are joining online from overseas as well. Just a few housekeeping points. DevPolicy's mantra is to foster open, evidence and respectful debate. Please keep your interventions at the conference to the point and be respectful. Disrespect in any form won't be tolerated. All conference rooms will have instructions on emergency procedures. Please note these and ask our staff if you have any questions on this or any other issues. We can be identified by our high-vis lanyards. Masks and sanitizer are available at various points around the venue, particularly at the reception. Feel free to use them and please let us know if those or anything else are running low. Finally, please download the conference app. You should have received a registration link for this. We may have to top up the registration limit as of this morning again, but bear with us. There have been changes to the program since the printed version and all those changes get reflected in the app. And it's also a great way to network with colleagues and other delegates. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank and acknowledge our AAC sponsors, including our returning sponsors from 2022, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, DT Global, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Australia, SMEC, and Cadmus. And our new sponsors for 2023, Apt Associates, ABC International, and Sustinio. Thank you for your support for the AAC. It wouldn't happen without you. I'd invite all delegates also to visit our sponsor booths, which are just outside the theatre here, and meet their teams. But our major partner for the AAC since its inception has been the Asia Foundation. The Foundation brings a wealth of regional expertise, fantastic local partners, and high-quality analysis and research to the conference. We always enjoy working with a really talented team, and it's great to have them back again in 2023. And with that in mind, I'd like to warmly welcome the President and Chief Executive of the Asia Foundation, Laurel Miller, to the microphone to make some opening remarks. Thank you, Laurel.
Thank you very much, Cam, and good morning, everyone here in person and online. On behalf of the Asia Foundation, I am delighted to welcome you to the 9th Australasian AID Conference, which the Foundation is honored to be co-convening again with Stephen Howes, with Cam, and with our other friends from the Development Policy Center. It was such a privilege to join the very warm and generous welcome to country yesterday evening, and I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri peoples on whose traditional lands we meet today, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. While this is my first opportunity to join the AAC, having only taken up the role of President of the Asia Foundation in February of this year, it's clear that in its 9th iteration, this conference has established itself as an important venue for serious discussion on national, regional, and global issues in international development and development cooperation. For those of you who may not be so familiar with the Asia Foundation, we are a nonprofit international development organization that's committed to improving lives and expanding opportunities across Asia and the Pacific. Informed by decades of experience and deep local expertise, our work across the region is focused on governance, women's empowerment, gender equality, inclusive economic growth, environment and climate action, and regional and international cooperation. It's our privilege each year to draw on that local expertise and networks from across the region to contribute diverse and respected voices to this conference. This year, from Nepal, Fiji, Cambodia, India, and Indonesia, we are so pleased that our colleagues are able to join with so many others from the region in making this conference what it is today. In a year when the Australian government released its new international development policy, and when so many of our colleagues are facing, so many of the challenges facing our region only came into even sharper focus, this conference provides a valuable opportunity for quality discussions and constructive contestation. In the many lively sessions and networking opportunities that I'm sure you'll experience over the next 2 days, a positive contribution will no doubt be made towards tackling some of the toughest challenges and grappling with what contemporary development practice should look like today. Finally, I would like to thank the outstanding conference organizing team for the many hours of preparation put into making this event happen. We have an incredibly rich agenda in front of all of us, and I wish everyone a fruitful and enlightening 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurel. And I'm sure everyone who's attending the dinner tonight is really looking forward to your keynote. I know I am. Okay, now to get underway. To introduce our opening keynote, it is my pleasure to welcome my boss and the Dean of the ANU's College of Asia and the Pacific, Professor Helen Sullivan. Thank you, Helen. Cheers.
Thanks so much, Cam. And it's such a thrill to be invited back to welcome our distinguished guest. I love this conference. This conference, as many of you know, used to be at the beginning of the year, and it really marked the celebration of the start of the year. Now it's at the end of the year, and equally it marks just a wonderful representation of what we at the College of Asia and the Pacific like to think of as the way in which we do things, the coming together of intellectual rigor with practice and the formulation through contestability of ideas and evidence as to how we might address some of the challenging problems of our time. So I would like to add my welcome to all of you and to wish you well for the conference. I'd also like to pay my respects to the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and recognise that this land on which we stand, live and work was never ceded. I'd also like to welcome any First Nations people who are joining us either here in person or online. But my happy task today, and my great pleasure, is to welcome the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance for the Republic of Fiji. It is such an honour to host a regional leader of the standing and the calibre of the Deputy Prime Minister to deliver the opening address for the 2023 Australasian AID Conference. I'd also like to acknowledge other distinguished guests, including Laurel, who I had the great pleasure to meet earlier in the week, the new President and Chief Executive Officer of the Asia Foundation and the ANU's major partner for the conference, and acknowledge His Excellency A.J. Amrit, the High Commissioner of Fiji to Australia, as well as officials from the Fiji High Commission and Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, our great friends from across the lake. In addition to his current ministerial roles, Deputy Prime Minister Prasad is leader of the National Federation Party in Fiji. He is a former Professor of Economics and Dean of the Faculty of Business and Economics at the University of the South Pacific. Since being appointed as part of the new Fiji governing coalition in 2022, the Deputy Prime Minister has been at the forefront of economic, democratic and development reforms being pursued by the Rabuka government. Professor Prasad is widely and rightly seen as a leader of the Pacific region. In the past, foreign ministers and shadow foreign ministers of Australia have opened this conference, and it is only fitting that this year it is a regional leader. Thank you, Professor Prasad, for delivering this year's opening address, and can you all please join me in welcoming him to the stage?
Professor Helen Sullivan, Dean ANU College of Asia and the Pacific, Laurel, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Asia Foundation, His Excellency Ajay Bhai Amrit, Fijian High Commissioner to Australia, Professor Stephen House, my good friend, Director of Development Policy Center, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's good to be back at ANU. I remember I was here last in 2012, speaking at one of the updates. Bula Binaka, namaste, and good morning to all of you. And thank you for the invitation to address the 2023 Australasian AID and International Conference here at ANU. And please also allow me to start by paying my deepest respect to the traditional elders, leaders and community members of the Ngunnawal country, on whose lands this conference takes place. I extend my gratitude to traditional leaders and elders across Australia and thank them for hosting so many Fijians across this great country. I also join Fiji's Prime Minister in urging Australia to take further steps to advance reconciliation and self-determination. Australia's standing in the Pacific will be enhanced as it does so. I also acknowledge that opening speakers in earlier years, such as the Australian Foreign Minister, shadow foreign ministers, and therefore I appreciate the invitation to a regional leader rather than an Australian leader this year. I know you could have invited any of my fellow ministers from the Blue Pacific, but you have invited me and I'm honored, and I'll try and do justice to this vast region and its diverse peoples. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in reflecting on the future of the partnership between Australia and the Pacific, I want to begin by sharing a story that is dear to my heart. Some 45 years ago, Fiji, as a young, newly independent country, our leaders were thinking hard about how people could earn a decent living and find their way in the world. And as part of that soul-searching, Fiji reached out to its friend, the government of Australia, to support its effort to enhance rice production and food security in Fiji. We have a long history of growing rice in Fiji. Nobody really knows when the first crop was planted. And it took hold with the arrival of the Indian indentured laborers from the late 19th century onwards. Through this, we found some regions of Fiji, including Raketi, on the island of Vanuatu, had conditions suitable for growing rice. And despite good soil, water, and high demand, far too many rice farmers in Raketi were losing their crops to salinization, resulting from saltwater intrusion and rising sea levels. If this were not enough, they were also losing harvest to frequent droughts. And as a result, Fiji spent millions of dollars importing rice, income that could have been flowing to our own farmers. Through well-researched interventions, Australia supported Fiji to build irrigation systems across 100 farms in Raketi. This allowed gravity-fed distribution to take place. Newly built waterways protected farms from rising sea levels. Regular and predictable water from dams and canals allowed farmers to harvest multiple crops in a single year for the first time. For the farming families in Raketi, this development investment almost doubled their incomes. I know many of you are likely waiting on the final of Yellowstone, but please don't think that farmers and incomes on this scale. Farm sizes in Raketi were still very small. Over 100 of them would have fit the ANU campus here. But one thing they had was certainty of income. Income security meant that they could access credit. Access to credit meant that they could invest to improve their food security through diversifying into new crops and livestock. Crucially, increased income meant that they could afford to pay bus fares, school fees for their children to go to school. And two of these farmers in Raketi were Mrs. Bhagwande and Mr. Puran, my mom and dad. And I'm genuinely humbled to give this address today. You have given me a platform to express my appreciation to the people of Australia for the support they provided to my family in a deeply personal way. Australia's aid investment allowed me, a remote rural student, to become an economics professor. And on the back of this otherwise impossible proposition of a good high school education, I'm today the proud leader of the Pacific's oldest political party, the National Federation Party, and also Fiji's Deputy Prime Minister. So in a heartfelt way, I want to say Dhanyavad, Vinaka Vakalevu, and thank you to the people and the government of Australia. On behalf of my beloved mom and dad, your generosity made them or helped them make the journey over the years. I'm usually a very private person, but today I wanted to share this story as it has shaped my thinking about development and development partnership between Australia and the Pacific. And there are 5 reflections that I want to share. First, never forget that Australia's development assistance touches and transforms peoples and communities. And this is my most important message to you. An agriculture program 4 decades ago changed the course of my life. It did so for children of other 100 families. And I have no doubt that it has done so or done the same for hundreds of thousands of others across the Pacific, or Blue Pacific as we call it now, and well beyond. Second, while Australian engineers, experts, advisors shaped the program, I remember as a child watching my parents and elders advising these experts. They told us proudly that they taught Australians how to plan waterways so water would flow even during droughts, and on how to build dams so that seawater would be kept out during storm surges. And therefore, my guidance to you is work with Pacific Islanders, not for them. Third, 4 decades ago, our parents actually knew that they were dealing with changed rainfall patterns, and the seas were rising in unusual ways. While our village elders knew that the climate change or climate was changing, this term was still to make its way into development textbooks and policy discussions. And my lessons from this is to value and work with traditional knowledge. It will enrich, not dilute your practice. Fourth, I want to underscore the importance of evaluation and learning. I know that we invest in monitoring and evaluation during the life of development programs. This is important. What matters even more, however, is evaluation and learning 5 to 10 years after the program has ended. This is where you will assess the real impact of your work and learn the real lessons. And finally, please do not underestimate what Australia gets in return for its development investments. These 100 households in Raketi alone have sent teachers, health professionals, engineers, I don't know about professors, who are today working across Australia. And these are fine folks enriching your communities. So colleagues and friends, you now really have a window into how Australia's development program has shaped my own journey. I turn to the future of Australia and Pacific development partnerships now. The meeting of the Australian International Development Community, or this meeting, could not have come as a more timely discussion. In September, Pacific leaders participated at the United Nations Strategic Development Goals, the SDG Summit in New York. At this SDG stocktake, it was clear that Pacific was well behind in achieving its development targets. 2 weeks ago, Pacific leaders met in Rarotonga, where they expressed their growing frustration at the pace of delivery of development programs by many of our development partners. We are also meeting soon after the first official visit to Australia by a Fijian Prime Minister in many years. Fiji and Australia both spoke enthusiastically about an enhanced relationship. And lastly, we are meeting in the shadows of a much larger meeting in Dubai, the United Nations COP28, one of the most consequential of global climate conferences for the Blue Pacific. Allow me to pull these threads together. The decades ahead will be challenging for both the Blue Pacific and Australia. And this century, in my view, will be like no other. Some of the greatest transformations and some of the fiercest geopolitical contestation will play out in the Blue Pacific over the next decades. The center of the global economy has moved into Asia. By 2050, majority of the 10 largest economies in the world will be in the Indo-Pacific region. China, India, Indonesia will be among the 5 largest economies in the world well before 2040. The Blue Pacific finds itself in the middle of this great shift. Geopolitical contestation will play out across the range of areas, including the digital world, artificial intelligence, outer space, ocean surface, and seabed, and of course across the traditional sectors of the economy. And Australia, I know, is deeply concerned about these changes, so are we. Across the Blue Pacific, our leaders have expressed their deep anxiety with the growing intensity of this geopolitical contestation. As a response, Fiji's Prime Minister, the Honorable Sitiveni Rabuka, has called for the Pacific to be an ocean of peace. I think that is powerful. It signals that we place the Pacific interest first and foremost. It conveys to the world that we recognize that regional stability is the bedrock of our development, of our progress. And let me underscore the connection between stability and development. Inclusive development is the surest path to stability across the Pacific. Stability is the pathway to our prosperity. If the Blue Pacific is unable to develop resilient health systems, modernize education systems, adapt food systems to withstand the onslaught of climate change, or to manage their burdens, they are likely to enter pathways that lead to instability, and state fragility. Fragile Pacific states will be less likely to be able to mediate geopolitical competition in ways that protect our sovereign interests. Unstable and fragile states in our region is not good for Australia. It is worse for us in the Pacific Island. So to those who doubt the centrality of getting development right, this is the bluntest way in which I can present it. Our current pathway, where many island states risk being unable to secure progress against the Sustainable Development Goals, national and regional instability can no longer be ruled out. The stocktake on SDGs is a wake-up call for the region. It is a wake-up call for our development partners. And my message to you as a community of development experts and professionals, your work matters to this region like never before. Colleagues, the Blue Pacific is not a region of gloom. Ours is a region of limitless possibilities. Like Asia, the Blue Pacific is on the move. The region is buzzing with energy and creativity. These are felt inside governments, in private sector, small and medium enterprises, and across communities. We have so much to learn from each other. Island states learning from each other, islands learning from Asia, Asia learning from the Pacific, and Australia learning from across the region. The era where the knowledge was seated in rich and industrial countries to be shared with poor developing countries has long gone. And let's keep that era buried. It nevertheless sometimes amazes me what we continue to allow colonial concepts to wear out the welcome in international development. Maybe a bit harsh, Stephen. When the ADB and the World Bank and aid partners use the term capacity building, I think about it seriously. As a finance minister, I can tell you that I meet development partners throughout the day. I may start my day by meeting the EU, for example, which may be proposing a program to build our capacity in agriculture. Then I may meet the World Bank, which may be saying we lack public finance management capacity. Then I may meet the US, who may tell me that our private sector lacks capacity. And this goes on and on every day. So by the end of the day, it kind of leaves me thinking about how we function as a country if we lack capacity across so many areas. And let me say, how would you feel if we were to say that the Australian National University, that Fiji sent the late Professor Bridgelal to build capacity because Australia did not have the capacity for historical research, and that Fiji had sent Noah Nandruku to build the capacity of Canberra Raiders. It is both patronizing and often humiliating when experts stand up, in and out, to build capacity. I say walk in the shoes for a day. Empathy is an important starting point for good development. And when you do, like many of those in this room have done, you will find that the Blue Pacific is brimming of capacity, skills, and talents. And the sooner everyone begins to work with this, the more impactful development investments will be. And I say decolonizing development really matters. Work with our systems and not parallel to them. Be persistent in broadening the spaces for Pacific Islanders to shape and lead the development narratives. I have seen a very welcome shift among some development partners to locally led development. If development is not actually locally led, it most probably is not development. All development must be locally led. All development programs must be locally designed as best as possible, locally implemented. When the leaders of the Pacific small states met in Rarotonga earlier this year, they were unequivocal. The Blue Pacific alone will define, it will alone shape, and it alone will frame its own development. This was aspirational before, it is foundational now. If programs for the Blue Pacific are designed in distant capitals in Washington, Beijing, and elsewhere, these programs will fail at the very start. even if they do succeed in some of their outcomes, they will most likely harm the confidence, erode the resolve of the Pacific peoples to decide their development futures. When the Fijian Prime Minister returned from his official visit to Australia a few weeks ago, he expressed confidence in the potential of an expanded partnership between Australia and Fiji, and indeed the wider Pacific. And please allow me to build on that confidence. Given our shared futures, my message to Australia is to purposefully consider becoming part of a fully integrated Pacific. Australian businesses, its entrepreneurs, students, holy men and women, skilled workers, professionals, and Australian families should be able to freely move and work across the vast blue Pacific. So should Pacific Islanders, all Pacific Islanders, not some Pacific Islanders. And as they do, they will create new opportunities across our region. And taken from the world of trade agreements, this would actually look like a Pacific Most Favored Nation partnership or agreement. A Most Favored Nation partnership would extend reciprocal privileges, including on all visa categories, and confirm a shared commitment by all countries to protect citizens, families, and businesses from Australia and from the Pacific, in Australia and across the region. This is pragmatic, this is doable, and its time has come. We have to make a start by lifting visa restrictions on movement of our peoples. This is the most basic of our starting points. We have made progress with programs and support thousands of Pacific Islanders to work for short periods in Australia and New Zealand. We have welcomed recent progress in Pacific Engagement Visa, which will allow unskilled Pacific Islanders a pathway into longer-term residency. These are helpful, but I consider these to be stopgap measures at best. And the next step must surely be a visa-free Pacific. This is the most basic building block for integration. This is not about incremental increases to some categories of visas, but accepting that Australia and the Blue Pacific are part of the shared region in the world. The whole region can be a vibrant region of mobility and opportunities for Australians and all Pacific Islanders, not a region of opportunity and mobility for some of our elites and the highly skilled. I've actually laid out the economic case for this elsewhere, and therefore I will not bore you with the details this morning. In this room full of development professionals, I will skip to the core. The benefits of a visa-free Pacific region that includes Australia and New Zealand are going to be immeasurably substantial for all our economies, for our societies, and for all our peoples. This is a consideration for all Australians. Is broader interaction between the Pacific Islanders and Australians a source of anxiety in Australia? That's a question I want to leave you with. This is also a consideration for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. Do they desire greater interaction with the Pacific families? And this is a decision for Australia's leaders across its great political parties, here at the federal level and across the states. Do they place a high value in the broad partnership with the Blue Pacific, as we in the Pacific do with Australia? I can assure you that the Pacific Islanders' desire for Australia to be a full and equal member of the Pacific family of nations is universal. I know this. An economically integrated Blue Pacific will arise from a foundation of visa-free movement of people. It cannot arise without it, not a chance. And I know that economic integration inevitably means far greater security integration. We will all be more secure for it, not less. And I encourage Australia to give due consideration to the call for establishing a fully integrated region. Pacific leaders are unanimous that this is an idea whose time has come. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, I now turn to the climate emergency that has unleashed on the Blue Pacific. I know I'm speaking to an audience that is very familiar with the scale of impacts of climate change across the Pacific. I know as well that many of you have worked on Australia's humanitarian responses to climate disasters. Many of you may be quietly living with the trauma of working in post-catastrophe settings long after you return. Many of you would have seen firsthand the intense impacts of climate catastrophes impact upon women, people with disabilities, children, and those living in remote communities and islands. And I'm deeply grateful for your support in those trying times, and I'm certain that the region shares its gratitude for the work you do. I know, and I don't need to convince this audience of the need to act urgently on climate change. A temperature rise beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius will have great impacts on the Pacific. A 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise, Pacific Island economies tend to lose 40 to 80% of the land-based economies by the end of this century. A 1.5 degrees Celsius goal may be breached as early as 2030. And some people say that the breach of 1.5 is effectively a death sentence for the Pacific. And this is why COP28 is so crucial to us. And I know that Pacific leaders are not traveling to Dubai to bury the 1.5 degree goal in its desert sands. They are actually there to save the 1.5 degree goal from being buried. Country after country across the Pacific have said that they do not desire to be relocated. They want to stay on their lands, in their countries, preserve their identities, pass on their timeless heritage to generations yet to be born. 1.5 degrees Celsius is about a lot more than economic losses and damage. A lot more, in my view. And with humility, I urge Australian businesses and communities to support our efforts to secure a 1.5 degrees Celsius target. This will need enhanced climate action by Australia domestically and solidarity with the Blue Pacific inside the halls where the world leaders decide the future of our planet. We are fighting against much of the world to hold on to this goal. It would be unfortunate if we could not count on the people and communities and governments of all the states of Australia as we take on the world in this fight of our life. To win, we need resources. In our battle against climate change, we find ourselves in the midst of another reality. And that is an international financing system architecture that systematically undermines small states. An international financing system that needs to be reformed. The global financial architecture was actually not designed with the small states in mind. Small states cannot bring their adaptation programs to the private markets because of scale. Small states cannot borrow to rebuild the same infrastructure over and over again each time they get destroyed by gruesome cyclones or storm surges. The global financial system, in many ways, is broken. Very few Pacific states are in a position to take new loans necessary for the scale of infrastructure that is needed. No Pacific state should have to borrow to respond to humanitarian crisis that results from climate catastrophes. Yet, this is precisely what we are forced to do. Catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe. And when Pacific states borrow for humanitarian recovery, it means that something else has to give up. Inevitably, investments in health, education, and social protection suffer. Therefore, the Pacific leaders are calling for all climate finance vehicles to have dedicated small windows, particularly windows for small states. From the Green Climate Fund to climate funds within the ADB, World Bank, IMF, and yes, this must include the yet to be operationalized Loss and Damage Fund. It's been approved. It will be based with the World Bank, but there will be a lot more work that will need to be done. All special purpose small state funds need to have three crucial elements. First, they should be, or the small states should be able to access those funds rapidly. Second, they should recognize that small states cannot be subject to the same bureaucratic hurdles that larger countries with large bureaucracies can. Third, they should be largely grants. And if they are loans, they need to be of an ultra-concessional nature, with extended repayment periods. Let me be very clear on this. The international financial system needs fundamental transformation if the small states are to have a fighting chance. It does not need tinkering on the edges. And I hope, and we know that Australia will use its influence to secure the fundamental reforms that are so necessary to give the world's most vulnerable states a fighting chance. Is this, the question I want to ask, is this too much to ask for? Does anyone really believe that the smallest states in the world should be required to take loans to pay for the impact of a climate crisis that they didn't cause, or we didn't cause? Surely nobody thinks that borrowing terms should be the same for Kiribati or Tuvalu as they are for India, Indonesia, and other larger economies. Friends, my last contribution, I know I've gone on for a while, my last contribution is on the how of international development. In Rarotonga, Pacific leaders selected a theme: our choices, our voices, our Pacific way. And applied to the world of climate and development, this means that assistance must shift rapidly towards budget support. And I'm glad that Australia is moving in this direction and encourage it to take deeper steps in this direction. Today, Australia's direct budget support stands at around 10% of its total assistance. There's a long way to travel. Development support through national budget is the surest way to ensure that development is nationally owned and locally led. This will allow Pacific governments and civil society to deepen their relationships as they become implementing partners for national programs rather than for external development programs. And the Pacific, in my view, is ready for this step up. The direction of travel must be towards multi-year financing agreements. Few climate adaptation investments can be designed and delivered in a short 3-year cycles, very few. And I believe none can be delivered through an annual financing plan. Friends, the Pacific Island nations find themselves on a cliff edge, facing an interlocking climate fiscal development crisis. The time for business as usual and slow incremental change in the Australia-Pacific Partnership has passed. I pray that the suggestions I have advanced are given your consideration in the framing of a far more deeper and broader Pacific Partnership, one that promotes growth and development here in Australia and across the Pacific, one that promotes stability across the region, a partnership that ultimately makes our Great Blue Pacific far more secure as a region. That should be the strategic response to the geopolitical uncertainties and geopolitical contestation of our time here in the Pacific. And I must say that Australia lies at the heart of the new economic and political center of the world. In an expanded partnership, I envision the potential of Australia working with the countries of the Blue Pacific to rise as the world's superpower for climate solutions on land and across our seas. Australia, as a fully integrated part of the Blue Pacific, in my very strong view, will be one of the great political and development shifts this century. I encourage Australians to consider the infinite possibilities that will flow from this. The governments of all Pacific Island countries and all its people will walk in step with you as you undertake the steps necessary to get us there. This is our time, yours and ours. Thank you. Vinaka Wakalevu.
Okay, perfectly timed and as well as extraordinary. Thank you so much, Professor Prasad, for that remarkable and deeply challenging address. I think your audience, you've picked absolutely the right audience for those kinds of provocations. Now, we have some time for questions. We have overflow rooms that we will try to get to, but in order for us to make sure that technology works in those rooms and for people to have time to think about their questions, although I'm sure you won't need much, we'll take some questions from this room first. I have got a long list, so if you don't want me to dominate the conversation, put your hands up, please. Anybody? Yep, anybody? No, that's a fan, not a question. All right, well, look, I'm going to kick off, because as I say, I could have a conversation with you all day. The agenda that you lay out is very much one that is based on partnership, collaboration, shared decision-making. And that makes absolutely perfect sense. But we live in an environment, and I'm thinking Australia in particular, in an environment where a number of the pressures on democracies are actually pushing us in a different direction. They're pushing us towards protectionism. They're pushing us towards populism at its worst. And so I just wonder how you reconcile your very clear and thoughtful expressions of collaboration and Australia being part of an integrated Blue Pacific with the fact that the pressures seem to be pushing us in the opposite direction.
Very good question. I don't think there is there would be or there is a conflict between the objectives of Australia in addressing the challenges of democracy, global security, strategic considerations, to the partnership with the Pacific. Because, as I said in there's the stability in the Pacific as opposed to instability and fragility will allow the region collectively to face that challenge better. So I don't see a contradiction. Okay, Australia is part of Quad, part of AUKUS, part of a bigger strategic consideration. The whole Indo-Pacific strategy also includes the Pacific. So Australia having fully integrated with the Pacific actually puts Australia and the whole region in a much stronger position. Strategically, whether you look at it from the geo-economic point of view or geopolitical point of view. So I don't see a contradiction in that objective and the objective of a much more deeper and meaningful regional integration.
Yeah, no, I get that. Okay, we'll go here.
Thank you very much. My name is Anthea Mulakala. I'm from the Asia Foundation. So your address today was very much directed at Australia. Over the past year or two, you've had many other countries wooing Pacific Island countries. India, the Prime Minister was there earlier this year. Also, the Foreign Minister was there last year. The Chinese Foreign Minister has been through. There's been many delegations from China. So those two other partners, potential partner countries, are of interest. What kind of messages would you deliver if you were giving a similar speech to those two audiences?
Well, so two quick responses to that. Very good question. Again, I don't see, you may take out China for a while, but if you look at India, if you look at Quad, it includes Japan, India, US, Australia. You look at the whole Indo-Pacific strategy. It does point to a strategy to support democracy, human rights, stability, security. And so having India or Japan or any of these countries which are part of the Quad group or part of the Indo-Pacific strategy as having some kind of contradiction or conflict. But what I would like to say is that Australia's role in the Pacific is not only historical, but also much more obvious and perhaps, strategically much more important for the Pacific as well. So the Pacific's desire to integrate with Australia and New Zealand is itself an indication of what kind of partnership they would want. I mean, for example, if you're talking about visa-free, nobody's talking about visa-free with India or China or Indonesia. And so our objective of integration is quite obvious from the point of view of the development prospects that we see by having that integration with Australia and New Zealand, as opposed to any other consideration to begin with. But once you have that integration, I think it also provides a much bigger strategy for security as well and stability in the region.
Okay, well, now you've woken everybody up. Just before we come to more of you, though, we have a question from Western Theatre, so can we see if we can go there?
My name's Alice Tamang, and I've got a question. So Australia's in the process of developing a First Nations approach to foreign policy, which will hopefully lead to stronger connections between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and Pacific communities. What do you think could be some of the benefits for our region?
I think the question I raised was an important one. I think the benefits would be obvious. The idea is the people-to-people connection is already very strong. If you travel around the Pacific, you know, for example, you go into Fiji, you go to the remotest part of the country. You know, during the campaign, you know, I was asking people in meetings, you know, put your hands up if you have families in Australia, New Zealand, or America or Canada, but mainly Australia and New Zealand, and 90% of the hands will go up. And if you ask the second question to say, you know, do you receive any help or support? Again, you know, 90% of the hands would go up. And so the Pacific Islands would see the reconciliation, self-determination, the recognition of the First Peoples in Australia as part of the overall effort to integrate, to engage with the Pacific Islands. So I think there would be obvious benefits. You know, the signal from Australia by doing that would be quite obvious and beneficial for the broader agenda of integration and partnership.
Rowan Reid from Internews. One of the challenges that a lot of partners that we work with across the Pacific is lack of, is the visa migration program. So that you see some of Fiji's and other countries' best professionals coming to Australia and not doing what they're professionally qualified, working in a meatworks or something else. Do you think that by having an open visa program, you're only encouraging the brain drain from, you know, these countries that really need the brains and capacity?
I think that's one of the myths that is there to, you know, a lot of people say that to me, and my response to them is, a lot of the people, precisely what you said, who want to get to Australia and New Zealand, because they feel that it's very difficult to actually get there and get out. So having a visa-free or a system where, you know, there is free movement of people, businesses, it's not going to be a situation where people will pack their bags tomorrow and move to Australia and New Zealand. In fact, I think that it will slow down. It will create a situation where people will feel part of the whole region, part of Australia and New Zealand. And so the movement of the people will not perhaps be or the desperation of the people to move out in any particular way through any kind of visa to have a chance of getting a permanent residence or living here in Australia permanently. So it might actually help reverse the brain drain. And we in Fiji, for example, and many other Pacific Island countries, we would like people from Australia and those who are living here. And when I talk to the diaspora, you can see that a lot of them have developed new skills, new ideas, you know, they have savings, that they would like to go back, invest and live there. So what we've done recently is, change the immigration laws ourselves, where we're allowing our diaspora, even if they don't have a passport, if they want to get back to Fiji, live, reside, work, do whatever they want to do, they don't need a permit. They don't need to even have to get a Fiji passport, as long as they can prove that they are descendants of people who were citizens of Fiji during independence, or for our indigenous community if they are registered in the Volani-Kaambula, which is the identity list for them.
Okay, we have time for one more, just there.
Thank you very much for a most inspiring speech, Mr. Prasad. Australia spends the vast majority of its development assistance on governance programs. How can a child in Fiji, or anywhere in the Pacific for that matter, appreciate programs on building capacity around governance, on human rights, gender programs, when that child doesn't finish primary education, when that child barely eats a decent meal a day, when that child faces stunting, when that child is parentless because both the parents have died thanks to NCDs? Isn't there a disconnect in terms of the basic needs that the Pacific needs? And true, these basic needs ought to be met by the governments of those countries. And these fancy governance programs housed in SPCs, SPC, Forum, wherever else, and other organizations where you have consultants and advisors who get paid 200 times what the average person in this country needs. Shouldn't we go back to the basics and make sure the Pacific Islanders have clean water to drink, have basic education, and that the vast majority of them at least finish secondary school? We're in a room full of these experts who speak about development in a language which I, who have a master's degree from ANU, don't always understand. And while you criticize capacity building, shouldn't some of these development funds go to improving education in the Pacific, so we can start speaking the same language, for instance?
Yeah, thank you, Sadhana. I think there is, we have to admit that there is this disconnect between, I think both are important. Sometimes, from our own perspective in the Pacific, the governance structure, transparency, accountability is not there. So building capacity at our local level, having support is not a bad thing. But I take your point. I mean, the most fundamental issues that countries in the Pacific face is to provide, the basics. And yeah, so one needs to evaluate those things, look at, where the whole question of effectiveness of aid to the Pacific. Yep.
Well,
difficult question.
We have to leave that there, but that is a great question, I think, to leave us with as we go into the rest of the conference. Professor Prasad, that was a thoroughly stimulating and extremely thought-provoking address. We are, as you indicated, we're used to having addresses from senior politicians from Australia, and it is wonderful to have something that was so rounded, so thoughtful, and yet so provocative to start us off in what I know is going to be a very exciting conference. So please join me in thanking Professor Prasad once again.